I remember the first time I made something out of leather. My father showed me a belt and he said, "Someone you know made me this belt 20 years ago and it's still good today." I remember pausing and thinking, 20 years? Is that even possible? I was sold and I decided to make myself a belt, one that I still wear today. You see, in the olden days, people had a relatively small amount of money. They remembered the hard times and they were careful with what they spent that money on. I wanted a guitar strap for my guitar and I decided to make one and invite a few people over to work on their own leatherwork projects. I rarely use a tape measure, often only a set of dividers when measuring what cuts to make on my leather. I use a Stanley knife to cut out the leather, and for this particular design I wanted a lyrebird feather. I remember going on a bushwalk with my father when I was a kid and finding one of these feathers. That feather stayed in my hat for some years. This tool is called a swivel knife. I use it to put a little V-cut in the leather after I wet it. This next tool is called an edger. It's really just a angled tool that you use to knock down the wet leather and make your embossing pattern stand out a bit more. Over time I've figured out that you can actually knock down the leather and then use the tool as a bit of a screed to smooth it out a little bit more if you want. Sometimes I like to leave the kind of heavy dented marks though. This is a little tip I've got for my swivel knife. I think it's called a filigree tip from memory, but it's perfect for this feather pattern because it puts lots of little fine cuts which will mimic the hairs that you find on a feather. When dyeing leather, I predominantly use antique dyes. They have a little bit of a heavier pigment that settles in grooves and cuts when you apply it to leather. Because I want to use an antique brown on this whole strap, I'm actually using a fairly high quality nail varnish here to act as a relief and prevent the brown antique dye from getting into my pattern. Once the nail varnish is dry, I can get my brown antique leather dye. In antiques, sometimes you just have to kind of go over once, have a look at it, see if you want it darker. If you do want it darker, just go over it again. But you'll notice that each time you apply antique brown, it'll want to lift up the pigments left before. So sometimes what I do is put a really thin coat and kind of polish it off and then do additional coats after to darken it. To finish my guitar strap off, I've coated it with GY Saddlemaker's dressing, and I love this stuff personally. I use it on all my leatherwork stuff, bags, wallets, belts, everything. And it really can make the leather almost like plastic, like very, very waterproof. And what I do, one trick I do is put a really heavy coat on the leather like this, like crazy amount of it. And then I put it inside a black plastic bag and put that black plastic bag in the sun. And you'll be able to pull it out later and then do another coat and keep doing it till the leather won't soak any more in.